All of these factors contribute to what we then do as parents ourselves because of how we were raised, and then the generation that we're raising being so different. So some of it, every generation has some highs and lows, I'll say, as to what good qualities they're able to pass on. And a lot of those develop from some of the lows that they may have experienced from the generation that raised them. You're listening to the Experience Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Ajene Gaylor, and I endeavor to educate, encourage, and empower women to embrace emotional healing and eradicate the stigma of mental health in the body of Christ. On this episode, we talk about generational differences in parenting. I start out by just giving a brief overview of the generations and how they are defined. And then Michelle and I talk more about our own frustrations and even some encouragement when it comes to how we parent. Just to orient us to this generation conversation, that's a tongue twister, is to kind of define what the generations are, how we even determine them. So usually it has to do with the group of people who are all born at the same time, kind of raised within the same time frame, and there's debate around how long a generation is, but what I've seen on average is anywhere from 15 to 20 years, even though I have seen some be shorter, like 14, depending on what years you begin to count. So what I understand for today, and I got most of this from parents.com because I just wanted a source that would kind of get us all on the same page. And at least this is a source that's saying this is how we frame the generations. So of course, we're looking at the greatest generation, that's what they call themselves, or the GI generation, which had to do with those born in 1901 through to about 1924. So this is one of the larger generations, about 23 years or so. And these parents, they lived through the Great Depression. So that's really what the war and the Great Depression, that's really what framed who they were and how they parented, because they were raising their families with particular types of traits like hard work and grit, and because they endured such a challenging time in our history, the Great Depression. So then these became the parents of what is called the silent generation, which is my grandmother's generation. And that was about a 17-year period from about 1925-ish to 1942 or 45, somewhere in there. And this, their parenting style was similar to their parents. They were still very much the type of kids who were raised to kind of have grit and hard work and determination and do what you got to do and just make it through. And as children, because they were being raised by the greatest generation, they were expected to earn their way through life. So there was no slacking, have that strong work ethic. So they were raised to be one. So their parents demonstrated it, but they also expected it of them. And then we look at their children who were the baby boomers. So this is when everybody was having babies. So this is my parents' generation. So in my mother's generation, my in-laws have tons of siblings. And a lot of their friends and other relationships that they had with extended family members and even other cousins had tons of children. My family, my mother in particular, it was just her and her brother. So very different than all of her peers in the generation, was that a lot of families would have 15, 20 children. This was not uncommon. So this is during the baby boomer age, where that's exactly why the generation was named that. And around 1943 to 1964 was, about this time frame. And the boomers notably redefined parenting. And this was by being the first generation to look at their children with a different perspective on growing up. And they started a new concept like family meetings. Like the children had some input. They could share some things. They could say some things differently than how their parents were raising them, and then their grandparents. Of course, there was a lot of, you don't talk about certain things. A child should be seen and not heard, these type of attitudes and messages. So when they became parents, the boomers, they started to allow a little bit more integration because they grew up with a ton of siblings. So they had tons of siblings, tons of cousins. And so even their experience on being raised with a lot of other peers, I think had an imprint on how they parented. And then, of course, they had my generation, or our generation, Generation X, which is about 1965 to 1979. It did not end in 1980. 79. 80 started millennials. So I barely made it into Generation X. I'm at the very, very end. But all of my friends, like you and I, we're pretty much just a couple months apart. But I have other friends who are 10 to 12 years older than I am. But we're all in the same generation. So by the time I came around to having children with my peers who are my age, but then also I have friends who are older than I am and already had raised a lot of their children, but then also had children with my children's age. So a lot of my friendships began once I started raising a family, and I started connecting with others who were also raising families, and found pretty much everybody within this Gen X generation. We all kind of had similar characteristics. Like, we also have hard work, grit, but we were the latchkey generation where, for the most part, we were on our own. I'm sure there are some exceptions. There's always exceptions in all cases. But for the most part, as a society, as a generation, as a whole, we were on our own in a lot of ways. We were the first generation to let ourselves in the house after school, to come home to an empty house. My mother's generation, boomers, tended to have at least one parent in the home, a caregiver, a mother figure, a stay-at-home mother who was present, who made the lunches and walked the kids to school and did all of that kind of thing. Whereas Generation X, we had parents who were all working, or single family homes in a lot of cases. And the difference in how we parent, it tends to be more involved in our children's social and educational development. So we're the generation to kind of get our hands into what our children are doing. It's so funny because recently I watched an interview with Michelle Obama. She just released another book, and it was an interview with a couple of her girlfriends and her mother. And that was one thing that her mother kind of shared, is that they didn't bother to get involved heavily in their children's education. Like, so for Michelle, she applied to college and came home and reported it. It wasn't like the parent will walk you through the process and, help you and guide you. That wasn't occurring. And so she was like, oh, you got into, oh, great. That's wonderful. How are you going to pay for it? That's how her mother responded, was the view that they had on parenting and how much they got involved is not the same as what we as Gen Xers do. We're a lot more involved in our children's social and educational development, and we have a lot more choice. Growing up, you went to the neighborhood school in most cases, or your parents could afford private school and they would take you. Now, children have more choice. They can go to pretty much any school they desire, public or charter, which didn't exist when we were growing up, or private or alternative or early college, or like, there's a whole lot more choices and options. And that's what our generation has kind of created. And then we have the millennials, who do begin in 1980, and I will not debate this, and run about 14 to 20 years to about, year 2000 is kind of what people say. And the millennial generation, they parent with more open minds. They're raising kids in a very, very, very diverse family system and society than any other generation, completely diverse. And that has a lot to do with the internet. The internet did not exist when Gen Xers were children. The internet did not exist until we were teenagers, or some of us. Some were already adults when the internet emerged, because I'm at the very tail end. I first experienced computers in elementary school, where we would play Oregon Trail. It's my favorite game. Really enjoyed it. And we had video games that generations before us did not have. We had Atari. We didn't have, PS4, but we had video games on the television. We had a remote control you could use for the TV instead of having to walk up to it. Once we got into high school, middle school, when we were younger, you had to walk up to the television and turn to one of the 7 channels that you could see, right? So totally different experience. And now the millennial generation experiences the post-internet boom, whereas Gen Xers, we got that boom in the midst of us being teenagers and young adults, and raising families, like all of that came about as we were in our development. It's like the internet grew up with us. So we didn't have as much diversity. Your diversity had to do with how far you could travel physically. And then for the millennial generation, diversity had everything to do with how far you could go on your iPhone. Like you could reach the entire world all of a sudden. Now you had access to everything, everywhere, all the time, where there were limits even to how much TV we could watch. The TV would go off at midnight after the Star Spangled Banner, and then there would be static. That was it. There wasn't anything else to watch. There wasn't anything else to engage in. Now you have a generation of parents, the millennials, who are raising their children in a much more diverse and much more global existence. And that has impacted the following generation, which is the generation of children that you and I have, which is Generation Z, or the iGen generation, which starts at about year 2001, anywhere up to 2010, 2013 or so is where their generation supposedly ends. And they are our children, because I have teens in my household. And this generation, they're the first to be born into a world where they know nothing outside of a device and being connected at all times. Our children, Generation Z, has been connected since they were born. So even the millennials, even if you were at the older top of the generation of millennials being born in like 1980, still very close to ours, you may have had, high school, college, was when you had already been introduced to the internet and to the world and being connected. But we didn't have smartphones. We had flip phones. We had Palm Pilots. So you weren't connected 24/7. You had to plug into a wall and hear the that's what you heard when you connected to the internet. So it was always static. Even if you were on the telephone, you had to be in your house. Even if you had a cordless, which was revolutionary for us as high schoolers, and being in college was to have a cordless phone that you could walk around the house with. Prior to that, you had to stand by the wall where the phone was plugged into a landline. The Gen Zs, or the I generation, they have never known a world like that. They've only been connected, and they can have the whole world in the palm of their hand at all times, 24/7, 365. So they are completely different in being that generation of always connected, always engaged, and also being more global, even more so than millennials were, to everything that's happening, because the news cycle never ends for them. For us, Generation Z and even boomers, the news cycle ended when the TV went off or the newspaper would come out. That was it, or a magazine. Now the news cycle never ends. It's 24/7. So that is impacting how their brains are developing, how they're engaging socially. Like all of these factors contribute to what we then do as parents ourselves because of how we were raised, and then the generation that we're raising being so different. So some of it, every generation has some highs and lows, I'll say, as to what good qualities they're able to pass on. And a lot of those develop from some of the lows that they may have experienced from the generation that raised them. That there may have been some things that they don't want to pass on. They didn't like this way of being raised, and so they've changed or try to adapt to provide something different as a parent. So all of those things influence how we show up in our parenting. And then, because of how we were raised, how we grew up, what our parents experienced, and they keep passing on. So I think it's beneficial to recognize that. And then the final generation, which is new and emerging, is all the children born after, 2010, is the Alpha generation. Generation Alpha. I think that's just the cutest name. These are all those little ones that are running around. I have a few friends who are about 10 years younger than me, who are having babies and just had some babies, and maybe they have a 7-year-old, they may have a 2-year-old. And that generation, it's going to be interesting to see what the impact of always being connected is for them, because even more so than iGen, there's even more technological advances. There's going to be even more global connection, even within the last few years of what has occurred because of the pandemic, the racial awakening, the political climate, all of these things. our teenagers, Generation Z, are aware, but it's going to be interesting to see um, how Generation Alpha is being shaped post COVID, post, racial awakening, post political uprising, post all of these things, post Ukraine Russia war, like post all of these things. It's going to be interesting to see the impact of that, and then how Generations Z will become as parents because of what they've encountered and endured. I have conversations with my children, even though my mother was very open and she talked a lot with us, that I don't know that other parents in my generation had with their parents in the same way that I did with her. But even in this generation, raising my children, they are, their peers, their social relationships, all of these things are just different, just completely different. And what they're dealing with and what they're facing and how they have to be so aware of race and so aware of gender and so aware of these issues that were not pressing and in your face and being forced upon you, these ideals. They're facing something that our generation has not yet faced. And they're at the point of development. So I wonder the impact that's going to have. And then, of course, how we're going to parent them through it. So that's the introduction. And I didn't think it would take that long, but I was able to give us, or at least orient us to what the generations are. So my husband and I keep getting into these discussions about generational differences. Like we keep running into other parents who are also parenting Gen Z and understanding the differences between our generations and understanding a lot of why Gen Z is the way that they are is our fault. Mm-hmm. Because being a latchkey generation, a lot of us were first generation college educated because our parents were not able to, or it was more difficult for them to obtain higher education. Our parents were the civil rights movement generation, and they went through a lot of the hurdles and obstacles and difficulties to put us in a position so that we could obtain higher education, we could own homes, we could get good jobs so that we could retire in 30 years and get a good pension. That was the whole focus of our parents' generation. So they worked really, really hard. So they left us home alone a lot. So we were the latchkey kids. You went to school all day and then you came home by yourself. I think I was as early as 6 years old coming home alone with my sister to be home for the rest of the day alone until my mother got home from whatever she had to do. When we were older, she ended up finishing college and then going on to employment. But when we were little, she had to earn income. We were on welfare for a lot of those years. So it was very different in how we were raised to be more capable. We are a very capable generation. So we came from not knowing the internet to the internet emerging in our formative years to being the bridge between what the world was like before, .com boom. Yes. So we're in this position where we're capable. Like I was talking to a group of some former church members of mine, similar ages. Some of them are millennials, but they have children a little bit younger than my kids. And they were sharing some similar frustrations. Like, it's our fault. We spoiled them because we endured so much adversity in a lot of instances. Whether you had two parents in a home or not, there was a lot of adversity for our generation, and you had to be capable. You had to overcome obstacles. You had to kind of do more for the first time than previous generations had to do. And we've put our kids almost at a disadvantage because we're so capable. We just do it all. We figure it out. We handle it. We explain. We tell them. So they're not motivated, quote unquote. That's what I keep hearing. They don't know how, or they have so much fear about things that they don't understand or haven't had to do on their own. It's terrifying to them. Like my daughter stood in front of the thermostat the other day, my 18-year-old daughter. The windows were open and the air kicked on, and we have an automatic system, and she's standing in front of the thermostat, and I said, well, turn the air off. She was like, I don't know how. But my instinct was to get up and go show her. And I was like, wait, nope. I said, figure it out. So in 5 minutes, I guess she figured it out, because it's simple. It's a computer-based thermostat. Like you just had to turn a dial. And I'm like, you don't know how to turn off the thermostat? Like, really? But
Mhm.
at 14, 12, no, at 12, I had my first job. Every summer I worked. I had a, you know, job through the holidays. I started working at 12 years old. My 12-year-old, well, he's 13 now. I couldn't imagine him going to someone else, being responsible to answer to another authority and actually doing some work. Like, it's just totally different. So, all of that to say, we have been such a capable generation. Now we are raising our children to almost be codependent in a lot of ways. Like,
Mhm.
just not having an opportunity to figure this stuff out because we're able to do it for them. I had to catch the bus at 12 alone across my city, not a school bus, not the yellow bus, the city bus with
Mhm.
adults and crackheads and all the streetwalkers and all the things, right? I saw somebody's purse get snatched in front of the bus stop. We used to be out there in the bitter cold because we're here in Michigan. So we would get bitter cold, snow and ice, and I'd be out on the bus stop at 12 going to school across town because I didn't go to my local school. My kids have never had to stand at a bus stop. We take them everywhere they need to go. We have vehicles, so they get to where they need to get to. We take them, we transport them, we go get friends, we do all the things for them. Now they seem to be unmotivated. So my husband and I were just talking about it. I said, well, what does motivate them? Their devices, their phones, their iPads, all the screens. I
Mhm.
I had a revelation. I said, we need to create enough friction that it produces something in them without making them feel the stress that we were under at their age. I don't remember being 18 and having the option of, I just want to take a gap year and not go to school and just hang out at home and not even try a job. I just want to keep working at my little fast food job because it's easy and it's comfortable. I'm too scared of doing things. And so I'm just going to hang out here. I didn't have that option. At 17, I was on a college campus figuring it out on my own, going to financial aid, figuring it out on my own, going to the
Mhm.
advisor and having to speak up for myself. Like, I've taken my children to the store and they were afraid to talk to the cashier. Like, I was 8 years old with food stamps in my hand at the grocery store buying groceries for the house. Like, but they don't have to endure those type of things. So their lack of what we're like, you're not motivated, you don't have any grit, you don't have any work ethic, it's kind of our fault. So my husband and
Mhm.
I keep running into other parents who are saying similar things. He just told me a story today about the locksmith whose teenager, I guess she's like 14 or 15, got a internship at GM, right? This great internship. I think it's a summer situation. GM is one of the top three automotive companies. And so she's going to get this great opportunity and all of that. So she needed her birth certificate. So the mom has the birth certificate. The dad says to her, call your mom, get the birth certificate, turn it in. Do you know that this young lady did not call the mom for the birth certificate and lost her internship? Like, you didn't have to
Oh my
go
gosh.
to the health department and stand in the line and fill out a form. Like, you didn't have to do
Yes.
any of that. You just had to
Right.
call your mother and get the birth certificate. That's this generation because
Oh
they've
my goodness.
seen Instagram ready success, Instagram
Mhm.
mobile, right? Promotion. They see people who are overnight successes supposedly on social media because of what they see promoted through that platform, that they think everything is easy, they don't have to work, and so their work ethic is so damaged. So it's partially our fault, but then it's also our society, just where we are today. So we decided to motivate our children differently instead of being frustrated and reacting to what we're seeing that they're not doing. Is our goal
Mhm.
at this point is to remove the distractions, which are those devices, and then to respond with, oh, you didn't do your chores this week. Oh, that's a shame. I guess you'll be the one responsible for that same chore this upcoming week, along with all the other things you're responsible for. Oh, you guys didn't take the dog out this morning when you were supposed to walk him. Oh, no problem. You lose your phone for the rest of the day. Oh, you didn't clean up behind yourself because you decided to make breakfast at 11:30 in the morning when breakfast ends at 9. Oh, guess what? You'll just be having smoothies for breakfast for the rest of the week. and just remove the emotion around, I'm frustrated that you're not something that I actually am responsible for not teaching you how to be. I've been letting you get away with it. I've been capable. I've been answering all the things for you. I've been giving you all the opportunities. I've been telling you how you can do this, that, and the other, and you haven't had to figure it out. So we're trying to find that balance of, we still want to be supportive and loving parents. We still want to provide for our children. We still want them to know that we're here, but we also need to pull back just enough that they got to kind of figure some stuff out and then live out the consequences of the choices that they make. If you don't finish your high school credits, guess what, boo? You don't get a diploma. And it's, as much as it hurts my heart to say that, because we're homeschoolers, you know, I get to determine in our state, I get to determine what graduation looks like. I don't have anyone telling me you must complete all of these credits in order to graduate. Mom and dad get to make that decision. But I feel like I assigned it to you. You didn't do it. I'm not just going to give you off the hook, because you got to live the consequence of losing out on all the summer fun you thought you were going to have because you got to finish in 90 days. So my husband said, you get a time limit. No more giving in to, we're trying to make it better for you by letting you off the hook, and now you're not motivated. So I think this happens in every generation. Like, the best and the worst of us shows up in our parenting. It just does, because you're trying to make up for the things that you feel like you may have missed as a parent or as a child growing up. And then you're trying to do a little bit better because your parents may or may not have been able to. So you're like, okay, I'm going to do better where I do know how to do better. But then that also has what is it? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So because you make that choice, there's an equal and opposite to this. So you want to provide more for your children. You want to give them more opportunity. You want to let them know that you're there, you're supporting of them. Then they feel like, oh, I don't have to try. I don't have to do anything. I can just ride on your coattails and I can just fall down. And I know you're going to be right there to fix it all for me. So just those type of things. So we're figuring it out. You know, this is our first couple of years with a household full of teenagers. We have literally 5 years left of having any minors in the house. So my son turns 18 in 5 years. So I hope by then we will have overcome some of these challenges. But I want to know your thoughts on the generational parenting gaps. Stay tuned for part 2 of my conversation with Michelle about generational parenting. And in that episode, you will receive the life work for this series. So be sure to check it out. That's it for this episode. If you have been enjoying listening, please consider sharing and subscribing to the podcast. And until next time, remember, you have been set free to live free, so choose freedom.